Welcome back. We continue right here. 412-575-2600. That's the number of the Bordas and Bordas hotline. Bob Pompiani, Gene Collier. We are joined right now by Rick in Squirrel Hill. Hey, Rick.
Hi, Bob and Gene. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Hey, Rick.
Go ahead.
Yeah, of course I want to talk about Antonio. First of all, I think he's one of the biggest jerks I've ever seen. I think he just cares about himself. But I have two thoughts. If he acts up and he's on the team, I wouldn't play him, and I would fine him. I know it may hurt the team, but that's the way it is. And the other thing I was thinking of, if he really wants to be traded, go to him and say, you know what, we could trade you, but we need help with the salary cap. You would have to pay back part of your signing bonus. And the reason I say that, I think when Barry Sanders retired early, Detroit made him pay some of that back. So I thought maybe that's a way.
That's a different situation. I don't think he's ever going to offer any money back to anyone at any time.
Well,
he just bought a $20,000 goat ring, for goodness sakes. You know, he has to make payments. But, Rick, I get what you're saying. And, by the way, Tomlin did discipline him by not playing him on Sunday, Gene. So he could have played him. He chose not to.
Yeah, you know, part of the initial reaction to this story was that, you know, Mike Tomlin does not discipline these guys enough. When I can't think of a time that came up when someone deserved discipline and didn't get it. He's disciplined Antonio before on several accounts, and in this case, he did again. Not disciplining him would have meant letting him play. So I don't really understand that objection, but I agree with you. He's certainly not going to give any money back, and the Steelers will trade him on their own terms. I don't think AB will be consulted much on that trade if it happens.
No. One thing I'll always say, he works harder than anyone. He goes out there and he performs better than anyone really in his position. You just saw that New Orleans game. It's just a shame that he cannot channel that into showing team respect. I understood that part of this whole thing that he went through when he left is because he did not agree with Juju getting the team MVP. Well, hey, he deserved it, you know, and yes, you helped him get it. You've won 4 of them. How many more do you need?
Yeah, well, it's all about respect with Antonio Brown, and you know, he's never really learned that you get the respect you deserve when you give some respect. As I mentioned in my widely ignored Trite Trophy column, Bob.
Which was very good, by the way.
Thank you.
I loved it.
There is no I in team, but there is an Antonio Brown.
There is. Line 1, Harry and Elizabeth. Harry, welcome to the Sports Call. Go ahead.
How you doing tonight?
Good, thanks.
Yeah, I'd say trade him to the Giants, straight up trade for Odell Beckham. What do you think of that?
Not much.
Not much either. I mean, that doesn't solve much. In fact, it'll cost you more money because Odell Beckham has a bigger contract. But Odell's a good example of someone who does sort of the same sort of stuff.
It's the same act.
And it's the same act, and he gets rewarded with a long term. And the reason is, ladies and gentlemen, because these guys can play. Yeah. They produce. Ultimately, the Steelers will be judged by winning. And when they win, people don't care about all this other stuff, right? No. And largely, that's what helps Mike Tomlin get through it, because they win. And so, therefore, he can deflect it all by saying, hey, listen, that stuff we take care of, we win.
That's right.
But when you don't win, it becomes front-page fodder. And it will in this case, because they didn't win.
Yeah, I mean, I can't believe some of the reaction to this. I shouldn't be surprised. I sit here every night. But this stuff about the Steelers being a laughingstock and all this kind of, the Steelers have won, what, 22 of the last 34 games. At one point, they'd won 14 of 17 road games. The Packers just went 0-8 on the road or something. I mean, you have to take a step back and look at the organization for what it is.
And again, it's just a few people who are getting a lot of the attention, and social media drives it more and more and more.
Absolutely. If you look at this little tailspin they're on, yes, they've lost 4 or 6 games, but this little tailspin also includes a victory over the Patriots you've been trying to beat for years, and you nearly beat the best team in football on the road. That's baked in there too. So I think what I'm saying is calm down, Bob.
Okay, Waylon in Washington. What's up, Waylon?
Hi, guys. How you guys doing tonight?
What's up?
Well, you know, it's not much of a subject, but, like, I met Bob Huggins one time, and I was really impressed. He was very polite and thoughtful, and he's got, like, a reputation of being such a tough guy. And, you know, obviously he knows basketball. I don't know if you guys ever came across him before or not.
Yeah, I love talking to him. He's got a good personality, good sense of humor. He's also tough to play for, but he wants it to be tough to play for. That's what he's supposed to do. He brings out the best in guys by the way he handles them. I don't have a problem with his coaching. What's your point? Is he?
No, there's not really a point. It's just like, he's got some when he coached for Cincinnati, he was a mean guy and all that. And then, now I see him. He's very nice. I think he's very good at what he does.
All right. He's not happy tonight, though, Waylon, because he lost. And Texas Tech, which was ranked 11th, they were on the ropes a little bit. They came back and won the game down in Mountaineer Land in Morgantown. Let's go out to Carol in Lower Borough. Hey, Carol, how are you?
Hi, fine. How are you?
Go right ahead.
This is quite a coincidence. There was a new program on tonight called The Masked Singer.
Yep.
And the contestants come out dressed in costume and sing and dance, and they have to guess who it is. And the person that lost was Antonio Brown.
What was he dressed as or masked as?
I don't remember now. My daughter was telling me. She called me, and I don't remember. But they came out in full costume.
I wonder when that was taped. It couldn't have been recently.
That's a good question. I don't know.
All right. Thank you for that, Carol. Gene, do you care?
No.
Okay. Thank you for that
Thanks
quick
for that,
assessment.
Carl.
Appreciate that. Line one we go. It's Bob in Clearfield. Hey, Bob.
Hi, gentlemen. Thanks for taking the call. I'm just going to give you my thoughts, and I'll just think I'd like to hear your response.
Go ahead.
But I see a similarity between the Steelers of 2018 and the Steelers of the 1980s as they came out of their Super Bowl run. You have some age on both the offensive and defensive lines. You have key positions being filled by marginal players, drafts that aren't yielding a whole lot, an aging quarterback, a coach who may be on the downward side of his tenure, and if it some upcoming labor strife, like you had almost with the same skills you had in the 1980s, could occur in just 2 years from now. So those are the similarities I see. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on it.
Gene?
Well, yeah, I think, if you take a really broad view of it, you could make that case. All these things are cyclical, but as I mentioned earlier on the show, the Steelers are weeks removed from being regarded as one of the best teams in the league. I don't necessarily see, all of those problems that you enumerate being affixed to this team, particularly among the linemen. This is the best offensive line in football, and one of the best offenses of football, one of the best red zone teams in football. They happen to lose 4 out of 6. If they made one play in any of those 4 games, they'd be getting ready for a playoff game, and none of this would be going on. But I appreciate that perspective. Sure.
All right. Geez. We have much more to go to, and many more calls to get to. It's Caddy, it's Aaron,
Let's
it's
go
Chris.
for an hour tonight, Bob.
It's
or you
Brad.
go for an hour.
No, we'll be back with more of your thoughts right here live on Pittsburgh CW.